So by 2003, you were on our 10th anniversary. And as you know, the Mossad Millennium Powerhouse in 2000 became almost the landmark legacy of that tour group. And we all going to the library, then Adesuwa Athletic Foundation, now LA84 Foundation, and saying one of these would be great in Marseille. And in that 10th anniversary celebration, you were very much of that tour group, I think the epitome of what that Anglo-American Youth Culture Initiative represented. And I think as you began to evolve and grow, and the Youth Charter's fortunes, to be fair, became mixed because the issues of young people became very mixed in that we still don't have a youth ministry in this country. The policies have been inconsistent at best. And I think more importantly, as we began to develop our international footprint, and by 2003, we were then presenting at the UN as our international work had grown from that criminal tribunal Hague visit in Holland. But the dialogue was still ongoing, but more importantly, and I think many people are getting an understanding of what you grew up in, because how many lives were lost of those around you in that community at the time. I think not many people really understand what it was like for young women to be caught up in the conflict on the streets of Mossad at that time. What was it like for you? And was that something you were glad to be away from, although you had family, you had extended family and friends that you knew were in some way or form affected? What was that by way of motivation, demotivation, or both?
Oh, even more motivation. I was very clear, like I said, I was always clear about what I wanted. And as literally, bodies started falling, it was like a shock behind me. Like, I have to go. It's time for me to leave. It was just at the point, at one point, it was just so painful. And everybody was like on tenterhooks, like, who next kind of thing, it was shocking. And so, it was
a good time to spread your wings and fly.
Absolutely.
Did you feel any guilt on the basis of those you were leaving behind? Were the lives being lost serving as an added motivation? As you know, when we were in LA, South Precinct LA, the gang culture was ever present. But you did see hope. Did you ever feel there was a lack of hope as the comparison of the two environments you've now had time to live in and experience?
I think, I read something recently about the difference between the UK and the US. And I think there's something inherently that, how did the writer put it, is that when you go to the US and people say, have a nice day, there's actually an expectation of that. There's an optimism behind that. And that in the UK, if someone said that, they would be concerned that they're going to jinx it. They wouldn't want to, and I think that sums up the kind of mentality. And I think it's inherent in that the US having this American dream is kind of in the fabric. So you think bigger, It is, when I got to Howard, there were people who were multi-generational Howard alumni whose families who had, were dentists and doctors in the 1910, and their aspirations were like, oh yeah, I'm doing dual degrees, I'm going to become a judge. I'm like, the level of dream thinking was so huge when I went to the US. And I think a lot of times, sometimes here, we're just still not at that same space, And I often tell people, like, in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, there were 2 black coaches, in the Super Bowl. And then you see, someone like Paul Ince, trying to get in and coach, like that's the difference. Like and there's still, that's not to say there are not miles to go yet, but there is something inherently, there's an optimism there that says that is inherent in the fabric of the culture.
Hard work
of the US.
will sooner or later pay off.
Yeah. There's an
that's different.
expectation.
There's an expectation.
There's an expectation there. And then it's just a matter of, access and what, certain things are in there. Coca-Cola does a huge scholarship, a diversity scholarship, and all these major companies, Howard's Business School is so renowned that all the major companies, Morgan Stanley, banks, companies all come to the, and recruit and give scholarships and pay with the intent knowing that you'll come back, and Pepsi, and will work for them. And so friends of mine, had dual degrees and masters and stuff that had been had been paid off because it's ingrained. There's a culture of feeding in and into communities and supporting and reaping the benefits of that. But I think it does. I think there's just a level of optimism in the U.S. that is not here. And I think when we went to that, I can't remember on the grounds of the Queen's that youth conference where they wanted to talk about
Catherine conference.
Yeah,
good grief, that's right.
Yes, and so and they had.
Right.
Yeah, so that was an experience.
That was an experience. Tell me something, because that was an interesting experience.
That was a very
because, as you know, I kept a very diplomatic yet expression-filled response. But you all outperformed me because I think some of you grasped what was being said. But even then, that Catherine conference and what you were placed in must have been quite intimidating on the basis of some of the comments you received. Yeah. What were your recollections of that?
That was a lot. My biggest recollection was a lot of people who are not tied in any way, shape, or form to these communities that they were speaking of. And so it was all this kind of lofty, looking down upon ideas that had no real basis at all of what young people needed. And they had, outside of us, there were, I remember them at 3 to 5 other young people on that trip, and at that conference, all of whom were at Eton and Oxford, who said, well, what do we need? We want for nothing. And it was like, okay, you're gonna host this conference that talks about youth and sport and culture and what that looks like, for the next 10 years in the UK, and you're going to invite young people from 2 schools that literally have, in the words of those young people, we have everything. We don't need anything.
But my thing about
it was just
because if you remember 95 at the Opportunity for Youth at Midland Hotel, I think that's what gave you the added spur, if you remember, in an invited audience, a uniquely invited audience, because Marion Van Peebles' father, if you remember, presented.
Yes.
And we had Professor De City from South Africa, the Sasol Under-23 Olympic squad, soccer squad. And then we had Alex Ferguson, Pat Cash, Chris Akabusi, David Wilkie, Chris Boardman. And I've just seen some of the photos, as you do now, upon reflection. And again, what we presented and what you presented really did set, I think, a revised and renewed look at what was an imperfect landscape. Would that have been fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of times policymakers and people who are impacting decisions on young people, there's such a disconnect. And so I think it was helpful to have, it's always helpful. I don't know how you can talk about any community, whether it's veterans and not have veterans there. If you're talking about, women and not having women there, it just seems so obvious. and yet that Catherine conference, it was just quite mind-blowing. It was different. It was
but all part of the program. Yes. All part of the plan. I would say that, wouldn't I? So come on, right, let's roll this all forward now. So you've moved to Hollywood. Yes. You then share an ambition that upon not getting within the industry, you're going to develop a unique added value to the industry. How did that really come about? And tell us what, from again another big dream, you've been able to turn into a reality.
It's funny you quoted something earlier about necessity being the mother of invention.
Absolutely.
And that's really what it was. I think, it's funny, you don't realize the skills that you've developed, but yeah, seeing something, creative from the ground up here, I guess I was just that shy or crazy that thought, why not redo it all over again for myself? But I love writers, and I knew story, and I had some time to really think, and I decided that this, I couldn't walk in on the skills I had, and I had these relationships, but I hadn't worked on the representation side. And so I didn't think I could walk into a management firm and say, hey, here I am, so just start my own. and so that began.
And the name of your company?
My company's name is Metamorphic Entertainment. My great-grandfather is from Sierra Leone, and all the boys in my family have Meta as their middle name, but it's spelled M-E-T-A, and it's pronounced Meta, and I wanted to honor my great-grandfather, and so I knew no one pronounced it Meta when you see it. People pronounce it Meta, and that's how the name came about. And then the word, actually talking with my mother, and we kind of came up with it together. And then I love the word unto itself, about transformation. I've had a number of those, and so it just felt perfect, fitting for the name of the company. And then I started with 2 clients, and then quickly grew to now having 16 clients, and both writers and directors. Diversity is always going to be my passion, and that's diversity in every capacity and form. So, I represent a white male drama writer from the Appalachians, deep in the Appalachians, who's, 10th generation coal mining family, to a woman who is a Nigerian American, a truly African American woman who speaks 4 languages and has lived in 3 countries, including the UK at the time, who is now an amazing upper level writer. So, and it's really about, how to nurture young creators. I say young, not in age, but in terms of getting started, and really building a voice and telling great stories.
So I'm going to ask that modesty of yours, which still resonates within you. The roster's quite an impressive one.
Really proud of. Her 3rd episode of TV was directing an episode of Criminal Minds, and that was a game changer for us, and it was nominated for an NAACP Image Award and became the spark of her career, and now is about to start an 8-month-long directing episodic span, where she'll direct Hawaii Five-0, Grimm, Sleepy Hollow, The Flash, Castle. So that's amazing, putting another Black female director on the TV map and the landscape. I rep Kia Pearson, who is the Oscar-nominated writer of Hotel Rwanda and wrote Cesar Chavez last year, who is writing a movie for Pierce Brosnan set in India next. And then we have a couple of things that we're taking out, new ideas that we're taking out, which we're really excited about. I rep Nkechi Okoro, who wrote on Bones for many years, who's just starting on a new show, Rosewood, with Morris Chestnut, that will be premiering in the fall, and it's also developing this year, so we'll be excited to see what comes of that. I rep another writer, Rob Suddeth, who has been writing Latino comedy writer, and he's written on The New Normal, The Crazy Ones, and now is writing on a new show with Eva Longoria called Hot and Bothered, which will also premiere in the fall. So we're excited for that. So it's
A full
a full.
and very impressive client list, and I suppose impacting and making a big presence felt in Hollywood.
Yeah, I'm the only black female literary manager in the business, so
Again, breaking ground.
that's